The gods were screaming. Nefret pressed her palm against the cool limestone wall of the grain storage room, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The voices crashed through her skull like bronze against bronze, violent, furious, and utterly inhuman. They spoke no language she had ever heard in the markets or temples, yet somehow she understood every terrible word. The scales are broken. The compact is void. Ra grows weak. His time ends. Then let the waters rise and the desert consume them all. She wanted to press her hands over her ears, but she knew it would do nothing. The voices didn't come from outside. They came from somewhere beyond the world itself, transmitted directly into the hollow space behind her eyes where her own thoughts should be. Above her, through the narrow window near the ceiling, the night sky pulsed with an unnatural crimson glow, not the warm gold of Ra's daily journey, but something cold and angry, like infected blood spreading through water. The other slaves had noticed it too. She'd heard their frightened whispers as they had been herded back to their quarters after the evening meal of bread and onions, but they couldn't hear what she heard. Nefret had been 12 years old when the merchant caravan was raided. 5 years had passed since she'd been brought in chains to this estate on the outskirts of Thebes. 5 years of grinding grain, carrying water, and making herself invisible. Slaves who drew attention rarely lived long. She had learned to keep her head down, to move like a shadow, to be grateful for the small mercy of being sold to an estate rather than the mines. But 3 nights ago, everything had changed. She had been sleeping on her reed mat when the first voice had torn through her dreams, a sound like thunder shaped into words. She'd woken screaming, and Bakura, the overseer, had beaten her for disturbing the household. The next night, she'd stuffed linen into her mouth to muffle her cries. Tonight, she'd fled to the storage room, where at least her trembling wouldn't wake the others. The mortal hears us. Nefret's blood turned to ice. The voice that spoke now was different from the others, calmer, more curious, terrifying in its focus. Impossible. The veil was sealed after the time of the first kings. And yet she hears. I can feel her terror like heat from a flame. Small thing, fragile thing, but listening. No, please, I don't want to hear. I don't. Then we have our messenger. The words fell on her like stones, and Nefret understood with horrible certainty that her life had just become something far worse than slavery. The gods had noticed her, and they had plans.
Dawn came without mercy, as it always did. The overseer's staff struck the doorframe of the slave quarters with 3 sharp cracks, and Nefret rose from her mat with the mechanical obedience of 5 years' conditioning. Around her, the other women stirred, 18 slaves who served the estate of Lord Kentika, a minor noble who'd grown wealthy from his date palm groves and papyrus fields. Nefret's hands trembled as she splashed water on her face from the communal basin. She caught her reflection in the copper mirrors someone had left carelessly by the washing area, a lean, dark-skinned girl with haunted eyes and the cropped hair of servitude. She looked the same as yesterday, but inside, everything had cracked open. The voices had continued until just before dawn, arguing in their incomprehensible divine language. War, betrayal, the ending of an age. She'd caught fragments of meaning that made her stomach clench with dread. The gods were breaking their ancient agreements with each other. Someone called Set spoke of reclaiming what had been stolen. A feminine voice, cold as the desert night, had laughed and said the mortals would drown in the chaos. "Nefret, you're wanted in the main house." Bakuda stood in the doorway, his weathered face showing none of the cruelty from the previous night's beating. To him, it had been routine discipline, already forgotten. "The lady wishes to speak with you. Make yourself presentable." Fear lanced through Nefret's chest. In 5 years, she had never been summoned by Lady Asetnefret, Lord Kentika's wife. Slaves of her station didn't exist to the nobility. They were merely functions like the grinding stones or water jars. She followed Bakuda through the estate's compound, past the kitchen where bread was being shaped into rounds, and the courtyard where the household steward was already berating a gardener about the lotus pond. The morning air smelled of baking bread, incense from the household shrine, and the ever-present sweetness of dates ripening in the groves. The main house rose before them, its painted walls depicting scenes of hunting in the marshes and offerings to the gods. Nefret had cleaned these corridors 100 times, but never when the family was present. Now she walked behind Bakuda, her bare feet silent on the cool floor stones, while her heart hammered against her ribs. Lady Asetnefret sat in the reception room on a chair of ebony and gold, her linen dress so fine it seemed made of light itself. Gold gleamed at her throat and wrists. Her eyes, lined with kohl and green malachite, fixed on Nefret with an intensity that made the girl want to prostrate herself on the floor. "You were screaming in the night," the lady said without preamble. "3 nights now. The household priest says it disturbs the ka of the estate." Nefret dropped her eyes to the floor. "Forgive me, my lady. I have had dreams." "Dreams?" Lady Asetnefret's voice was skeptical. "The gods send dreams to priests and pharaohs, not to Nubian slave girls. What dreams could possibly possess you?" "Tell her the truth. Let them know war comes." The voice blazed through Nefret's mind, the same curious, focused presence from last night. Her mouth opened before she could stop herself. "The gods are breaking their covenant," Nefret heard herself say. "The balance of Ma'at is collapsing. They sent me to warn—" Bakuda's staff caught her across the shoulders, driving her to her knees. "How dare you speak such blasphemy? My lady, the girl is mad from the sun. I'll have her beaten and—" "Stop." Lady Asetnefret rose from her chair, her face pale. "Girl, look at me." Nefret raised her eyes, and the lady gasped. "Your eyes, they're glowing. Bakuda, fetch the priest now." Nefret felt the divine presence settle over her like a weight, and when she spoke again, the voice that emerged was layered with harmonics that didn't belong to any human throat. "The message is delivered. The first warning is given. What comes next, even we do not know." Then the presence withdrew, and Nefret collapsed on the painted floor, her own terrified breathing the only sound in the suddenly silent room.
The priest of Amun arrived with an entourage that spoke of genuine alarm. 2 acolytes carrying a portable shrine, a priestess bearing sacred incense, and the priest himself, an elderly man named Amenemhat, whose wisdom was respected throughout Thebes. Lord Kentika had returned from inspecting his fields to find his household in chaos, and now the entire affair had escalated beyond what anyone had anticipated. They had moved Nefret to a storage room and posted guards at the door, as if she were dangerous. Perhaps she was. She sat on the floor, hugging her knees, trying to make herself as small as possible, while the voices in her head argued about what to do with her. She is too weak. The message-bearing will destroy her mind within days. Then we choose another. There is no other. The veil is closed except through her. Some flaw in her ka makes her permeable to our speech. A defect, a crack in the cosmic order. How fitting that our war begins with broken things. Nefret pressed her forehead against her knees. "Please stop," she whispered. "Please,
I'm just a slave. I'm nobody. Why me?"
"Because nobody is watching nobody," came a response, and this voice was different from the others, warmer, tinged with something that might have been regret. "Because the great ones guard the priests and pharaohs, but you slipped through unnoticed. Because sometimes the universe speaks through the smallest cracks." The door opened, and Amenemhat entered alone. He was tall for an Egyptian, his head shaved in the manner of his office, wearing the leopard skin that marked his senior rank. His eyes, however, were kind, the eyes of a man who had spent decades listening to the troubles of others. He sat cross-legged on the floor across from Nefret, an act of humility that shocked her. Priests didn't lower themselves to a slave's level. "I am told you hear the gods," he said quietly. "I am told you spoke with a voice not your own. I have seen such things before, though rarely. Tell me truly, child, what do you hear?" Something in his tone, in the genuine concern in his weathered face, broke through Nefret's terror. "They're fighting. The gods. They're planning a war. They say the old compact is broken, that Maat is collapsing. They say—" She swallowed hard. "They say they need me to carry their messages to the mortal world. I don't understand why. I don't want this." Amenemhat was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant. In the time of the first dynasties, the gods walked openly among men. They spoke to anyone who would listen. But their presence was too great, too terrible. Mortals went mad trying to comprehend them. So a veil was established. The gods would speak only through chosen vessels, protected by rituals and training. "But I have no protection," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know any rituals. I'm just—" A crack in the veil. "Yes, I understand." He reached into his robe and withdrew a small amulet of blue faience, shaped like the eye of Horus. "This won't silence them, but it may filter their voices, make them more bearable. Put it on." Nefret slipped the amulet over her head and immediately felt a subtle shift, as if thick linen had been draped between her and the divine cacophony. The voices didn't disappear, but they became more distant, less overwhelming. "Thank you," she breathed. "Don't thank me yet." Amenemhat's expression was grim. "If what you say is true, if the gods truly are preparing for war, then you are the most dangerous person in Egypt and the most valuable. There are those who would kill you to silence you, others who would use you as a weapon." He paused. "And there are those, like myself, who believe that if the gods have chosen you as their messenger, then perhaps your message is meant to save us all." He stood, offering his hand to help her rise. "I am taking you to the great temple. There we will determine if you speak truth or madness. And may the gods, whatever remains of them, have mercy on us all." The journey to the great temple of Karnak took half a day by boat along the Nile. Nefret had never traveled by boat before, had never been beyond the boundaries of Lord Khentika's estate since her arrival as a frightened 12-year-old. Now she sat in the stern of Amenemhet's modest vessel, watching the river slide past with the surreal feeling that she was living someone else's life. The Nile teemed with activity. Fishermen casting nets from reed skiffs, cargo vessels laden with grain and copper, wealthy nobles' barges gliding past with their painted sails and musicians. The west bank showed the green strip of life that bordered the river, then the sudden violence of transition where green became gold, fertility became desert, and life became death. Beautiful, isn't it? The knife's edge between order and chaos. The warm voice again, the one that had spoken of cracks and small things. Nefret gripped the amulet at her throat. "Which god are you?" she whispered. "Thoth, god of wisdom, writing, and things that fall between categories. I opposed this use of you, for what it's worth, but I am only one voice in a council that is fractured beyond repair." "What happened?" Nefret dared to ask. "Why is the compact breaking?" "Because Ra is dying." Thoth's voice carried genuine sorrow. "The sun god grows weak with age, and there are those who see opportunity in his decline. Set claims the throne should be his by right of strength. Apophis, the serpent of chaos, presses closer each night as Ra's power wanes. And there are others. Sekhmet hungers for war. Sobek grows restless in his waters. The balance that is held for millennia is collapsing." "And you need me to what? Warn people?" "We need you to carry our messages to those who might stop what's coming, or at least prepare for it. The veil prevents us from acting directly in the mortal world, but you, little crack in the cosmic wall, you can speak for us." Amenemhat glanced back at her, noting her whispered conversation with emptiness. He said nothing, but his expression was troubled. The great temple of Karnak rose before them like a mountain built by gods rather than men. Massive pylons towered against the sky, their surfaces carved with images of pharaohs smiting enemies and making offerings to beings far larger than human. The hypostyle hall's columns were so enormous that 100 men could not have encircled one with linked hands. But Amenemhat didn't lead her to the public courts. Instead, he guided her through side passages known only to the priesthood, down corridors lit by oil lamps that threw dancing shadows on walls covered with hieroglyphs. They descended into chambers beneath the temple, where the air was cool and smelled of ancient stone and incense. A chamber waited, circular and carved from living rock. Around its perimeter sat 7 figures, high priests and priestesses of Egypt's most powerful cults. Nefret recognized their regalia even as she threw herself to the floor in prostration. The high priest of Ra, wearing gold like captured sunlight. The high priestess of Isis, draped in cobalt blue. The priest of Set, red-robed and dangerous-looking. And others representing Ptah, Hathor, Anubis, and Osiris. "Rise, child," the high priest of Ra said. His voice was old, tired. "Amenemhat tells us you claim to hear the gods. A bold claim, a deadly claim, if false." Nefret stood on shaking legs. "I don't claim anything, great ones. I only know what I hear." "Then let us hear it too," said the priestess of Isis, her voice sharp as copper. "Speak the words of the gods if you truly can." Nefret opened her mouth, but before she could form words, the voices crashed through her with renewed force, and this time they spoke through her without asking permission. "The scales are broken." The voice that came from Nefret's throat was not hers. It was layered, masculine and feminine at once, speaking with the weight of centuries. The priests jerked back as if struck. "Ra's reign ends. The question is not whether the sun will set, but what darkness follows. Set claims right of succession. Apophis circles closer each night as Ra's power wanes. And there are others. Sekhmet hungers for war. Sobek grows restless in his waters. The balance that has held for millennia is collapsing." The presence released her, and Nefret collapsed, gasping. Blood dripped from her nose, hot and copper-tasting. The chamber erupted in chaos. Some priests were shouting denials, others were praying, and the priest of Set was smiling, a terrible, hungry smile that told Nefret everything she needed to know about where his loyalties lay. "Order!" the high priest of Ra bellowed. "Order! The girl speaks truth.
I can feel the divine resonance. The gods truly speak through her." "Then she is a weapon," the priest of Set said softly, "and weapons are won by those strong enough to wield them." Amenem had stepped in front of Nefret protectively. "She is a person, not a weapon, and if the gods speak through her, then perhaps we should listen to what they're trying to tell us, instead of scheming about how to control her." But Nefret, still sprawled on the cold stone floor, knew with terrible certainty that control is exactly what every person in this chamber wanted. She had become the most valuable and most endangered creature in all of Egypt. And the gods weren't finished with her yet.
They kept her in a small chamber within the temple complex. Not quite a prison, but not freedom either. Amenemhat had argued for her protection, insisting she be treated with dignity, and the council had reluctantly agreed. But guards stood outside her door, and she knew they were there as much to keep her in as to keep others out. 2 days passed in strange isolation. The chamber was finer than anywhere she'd ever slept. A real bed with linen sheets, good food brought 3 times daily, a window that looked out on the sacred lake where ibises waded in the shallows. But luxury couldn't silence the voices that continued to pour through her, like water through cracked pottery. She learned to distinguish them now. Thoth, who spoke with measured wisdom, Sekhmet, whose voice burned like fever. Set, all sharp edges and barely contained violence. Hathor, surprisingly gentle. And others, Ma'at herself, speaking in perfect equilibrium about balance being lost. Anubis, guardian of the dead, warning that the boundaries between life and death were weakening. But there was another voice, too, one that came in the darkest hours before dawn. A voice that was not a voice, but rather an absence of all sound, a void that shaped itself into meaning. This one never identified itself, but Nefret knew with cold certainty what it was. Apophis, the serpent of chaos, the thing that tried to devour Ra's sun barge every night. Little mortal, why do you serve gods who let you be enslaved? Why carry messages for beings who care nothing for your suffering? "I don't serve them," Nefret whispered into her pillow. "I'm just trying to survive." Survival. Yes, I understand survival. I have survived since before time had meaning, since before Ra first lit the heavens. I survive because I am what remains when all order collapses. And I promise you this. When the gods' war tears Egypt apart, the slaves will suffer most. The great ones will retreat to their celestial realm, but you will burn with the rest. What do you want from me? To give you a choice that no god has offered. When the war comes, speak my name, call upon chaos, and I will give you power, not servitude, not slavery, but power to reshape your own fate. The offer hung in the air like poison honey, sweet and deadly. The chamber door opened, and the high priestess of Isis entered. She was younger than Nefret had initially thought, perhaps 30, with eyes that missed nothing. She carried a tray bearing bread, dates, and beer, not food brought by a servant, but by her own hands. She sat at the table next to Nefret and said, "I thought you might want company, and honest conversation. My name is Merensenk." Nefret sat up, uncertain. "You're a high priestess. Why would you—" "Because I was a slave too," Merensenk said simply. 20 years ago, I served in the household of the previous high priestess. She saw something in me, educated me, trained me in the mysteries. When she died, she named me her successor. So I understand what it is to be property that suddenly becomes something more. She poured beer for both of them, an act of equality that stunned Nefret. The council is divided, Merensenk continued. Some want to use you as an oracle, forcing the gods to speak prophecies that serve our purposes. Others, particularly the priest of Set, want you silenced before you can deliver messages they don't like. Amenemhat and I are trying to find a third option." "What option?" Nefret asked quietly. "Freedom. We get you out of Thebes, out of Egypt if necessary. You live your life, and if the gods need to speak through you, they do so on your terms, not ours." It was everything Nefret had dreamed of for 5 years. Freedom, choice, life. "Don't trust her," Set's voice hissed. "She wants to control you through kindness rather than chains, but it's control nonetheless." "Or perhaps she means what she says," Thoth countered. "Not all mortals are deceivers, Set. That's your domain." "There's going to be a war, isn't there? Not just among the gods, here, in the mortal world." Merensank's expression grew grave. "Yes, the priest of Set has been recruiting followers among the military commanders. He promises them that Set will grant victory in battle, that the old order is weak and must be swept away. And he's not wrong about Ra's decline. Any priest with eyes can see the sun god's power waning. But Set's cure might be worse than the disease." "And where do I fit in this?" "You're proof," Merensank said. "Proof that the gods are in turmoil, that Ma'at is failing. Both sides will want that proof, either to legitimize their cause or to silence it." Before Nefret could respond, shouting erupted from outside. The clash of bronze on bronze, screaming. Merensank sprang to her feet, but the door burst open before she could reach it. Men in the red kilts of Set's cult poured in, led by a scarred warrior with murder in his eyes. "The priest of Set claims her," the warrior snarled. "Stand aside, priestess." But Merensank was already chanting, her hands weaving symbols in the air. Blue light blazed from her fingertips, and the first warrior flew backward as if struck by an invisible fist. "Run!" Merensank shouted to Nefret. "The window! The sacred lake!" Nefret didn't think. She simply moved, scrambling onto the window ledge as chaos exploded behind her. Then she jumped, and the cool waters of the sacred lake swallowed her whole.
Nefret ran through the night, her wet clothes clinging to her skin, her bare feet bleeding on the rough ground. She had emerged from the sacred lake and fled into the temple's outer courts, losing herself in the shadows, while behind her, Set's warriors searched and killed anyone who tried to protect her. She had failed Merensank, failed Amenemhat, failed everyone who had tried to help her. "Self-pity is useless," Thoth's voice said, not unkindly. "Keep moving. Head west into the desert. There is a place there, old beyond memory, where you might find shelter." "Why should I trust you?" Nefret gasped as she stumbled through the empty streets of Thebes. "All of this is your fault, you and the other gods fighting your celestial war and using me as your messenger. People are dying because of me." "People were always going to die," Sekhmet's burning voice interjected. "The war was inevitable. You're merely the spark that lit the visible flame." "Helpful as always, Sekhmet," Thoth said dryly. "Child, listen to me. What's happening now is larger than you, but your role isn't finished. There is something you need to understand about the nature of gods and power. We cannot simply die as mortals do, but we can fade. And when we fade, what replaces us shapes the world." Nefret reached the edge of the city, where the last mud-brick houses gave way to desert. The moon hung full and bright, turning the sand silver. She had no water, no food, no shelter. She was going to die out here. "Not if you keep walking," Thoth insisted. "West. Trust me." So she walked, because there was nothing else to do. The night desert was cold, so different from the blazing heat of day. Stars spread across the sky in a glittering river, and Nefret found herself thinking of the celestial Nile that the priest said the gods sailed upon. Hours passed. Her feet became numb. Her thoughts grew scattered with exhaustion and dehydration. She began to hallucinate, or perhaps she was finally seeing what had always been there, but hidden. The desert wasn't empty.
Shapes moved in the darkness, things that weren't quite real, but weren't quite illusion either. Spirits of the dead, wandering lost between worlds, demons with animal heads and hunger in their eyes, and other things, older things, that had no names in the human language. "The boundaries are weakening," Anubis's voice came through, tinged with anger. "As the gods war, the barriers between the realm of the living and the dead erode. This is what comes of abandoning Maat." "Then stop the war," Nefret shouted into the empty desert. "You're gods. Can't you just—" "Can you stop breathing?" Thoth replied. "Can you halt your heart mid-beat? We are what we are, Nefret. Sekhmet must be fierce. Set must desire power. Ra must burn. The compact kept these natures in balance. Without it, we simply are, in all our terrible glory and all our destructive excess." Dawn broke across the desert, and Nefret saw it. A structure rising from the sand, so ancient it seemed less built than grown. Black stone covered with hieroglyphs that hurt to look at, symbols that predated even the first dynasties. "The Temple of First Things," Thoth said quietly, "built when gods and mortals still spoke face to face, before the veil was necessary. Enter. You will be safe here, at least for a time. No god can act directly in this place. It exists outside the compact, outside the rules." Nefret stumbled through the entrance into shadows that seemed to swallow light itself. And there, in the deepest chamber, she found what Thoth had sent her to find. A man sat in meditation, so still he might have been carved from stone. He wore the white kilt of an ancient style, and his skin had the dusty quality of extreme age. When he opened his eyes, they glowed with a golden light that was both gentle and overwhelming. "Hello, child," he said, in a voice like summer wind. "I am Ra, or what remains of him, and I believe we need to talk about how to save the world."
The dying god looked nothing like the glorious, all-powerful sun deity depicted in temple carvings. Ra sat slumped against the wall of the ancient temple, his divine essence flickering like a candle flame in wind. But his eyes still held eons of wisdom, and when he gestured for Nefret to sit, she did so without hesitation. "You're wondering why I'm here," Ra said, "hiding in a ruin while my fellow gods tear the heavens apart fighting over my throne." "Yes, Great One," Nefret whispered. "Because I am dying, and I choose to die with dignity rather than cling to power until I become a tyrant." Ra's smile was sad. "I have burned for thousands of years, little one. I lit the sky before your ancestors learned to plant seeds, and like all flames, eventually I must gutter out. The other gods see this as catastrophe or opportunity. I see it as the natural order." "But the priests say—" "The priests say many things, most of which they learned from me during ages when I believed my own eternity." Ra laughed softly. "Gods are not perfect, Nefret. We are vast, powerful, and ancient, but we are not perfect. We make mistakes. We grow proud. We fail to see what's happening until it's too late." "Well said," Thoth's voice came through Nefret, carrying a mix of affection and sorrow. "Shall I tell her, or will you?" "You do it," Ra said. "You were always better with words than I was with anything except burning." Through Nefret's mouth, speaking with Thoth's measured cadence, came the truth. The compact that held the divine realm in balance was not an agreement among equals. It was a surrender to Ra's dominance. He was strongest, so we all bent knee. It kept peace, yes,
but at the cost of authenticity. Gods forced to be less than themselves. Ma'at maintained through divine dictatorship. And now that I'm too weak to enforce it, everyone's true nature is emerging. Set's ambition, Sekhmet's bloodlust, Apophis' hunger for dissolution. They were always these things. I just kept them in check. Nefret felt tears on her cheeks. So what happens now? They destroy Egypt? The world? Perhaps, Ra said. Or perhaps something new emerges. That's why Thoth brought you here. You, Nefret, slave girl, nobody, crack in the cosmic wall. You are going to do something no god can do. What? Choose. Ra leaned forward, and despite his weakness, his presence was still immense. The gods have chosen their sides. Set's faction wants rule by strength. Isis and Osiris's faction wants to preserve the old order. Apophis simply wants to unmake everything. But there is a fourth option, one that requires a mortal voice. A new compact, Thoth said through her. Not rule by dominance, but genuine balance. Each god sovereign in their domain, none supreme over all. Ma'at, not as imposed order, but dynamic equilibrium. It will be messy, Ra admitted. Gods will clash, battles will be fought, bargains struck and broken. But it won't be one great war that destroys everything. It will be life, complicated, imperfect, alive. And what's my part? Nefret asked. Tomorrow, at noon, Set plans to seize power in Thebes. He will declare himself supreme, demand Egypt's loyalty. If no one challenges him, he wins by default, and his reign will be harsh. Ra's expression darkened. But if someone stands before his followers and speaks the words of the fourth way, if someone offers Egypt and the gods a different choice, then perhaps enough will listen. Set will kill me, Nefret said flatly. Probably, Ra agreed. I won't lie to you, child. What I'm asking will likely cost your life. You will stand before a god of war and violence, speaking words that undermine his bid for power. Your chances of survival are minimal. Then why would I do it? Ra and Thoth were silent, letting her answer her own question. And slowly, Nefret understood. She thought of Merisonk, who had once been a slave and chose to free others. Of Amenemhat, who sat on the floor to speak with a frightened girl. Of all the other slaves in Egypt who would suffer under Set's rule of pure strength. She thought of herself, 5 years ago, dragged in chains from the wreckage of her village, the girl who learned to make herself small, invisible, nobody. Nobody was watching nobody. That's what Thoth had said. And maybe that was the point. If I do this, and by some miracle I survive, I want something. Name it, Ra said. All slaves in Egypt freed. Not just me. Everyone. That's the price of my testimony. Both God and messenger were silent for a long moment. Then Thoth laughed, a sound of genuine delight that echoed through Nefret's skull. Oh, I like you, little crack in the wall. Very well. The fourth way includes liberation. Ma'at cannot exist while some humans own others. You have our word. The word of dying gods and cosmic scribes, Nefret said with a slight smile. I suppose that will have to do. Ra stood, and for a moment the fading god blazed with his ancient glory. Then let us prepare you,
Nefret of Nowhere, for the most important speech in the history of Egypt. Tomorrow you address the gods themselves, and the world will either be reborn in balance or burn. I know. It seems to be my lot to carry impossible messages. The most important messages always are, Ra said gently. Now rest, Nefret. Tomorrow you change everything. She stood before the great temple at noon, and the sun blazed overhead with desperate intensity, Ra's last true showing of strength. Before her, thousands had gathered, priests of Set in their red robes, warriors bearing bronze spears, citizens of Thebes drawn by rumors of cosmic upheaval. And there, on the temple steps, stood the priest of Set, arms raised in triumph, calling for his god to descend and claim supremacy. Nefret, this girl who had been nobody, this slave who had become a crack in heaven's wall, opened her mouth and spoke the words that the gods, all the gods, even those who opposed each other, had agreed must be spoken. I bring the covenant of the fourth way. No god shall rule supreme. No power shall go unchecked. Ma'at shall be found not in dominance, but in balance, in constant negotiation between order and chaos, in the space between tyranny and dissolution. Egypt is freed from divine dictatorship, and all its people are freed from bondage to each other. The priest of Set roared in fury. Power gathered around him, red and violent. But before he could strike, something extraordinary happened. The crowd began to glow, not with divine light, but with something more fundamental, the light of choice, of free will exercised in defiance of cosmic powers. And one by one, even some of Set's own followers, they chose the fourth way. Set himself manifested for just a moment, his towering form crackling with barely restrained violence. He looked at Nefret, this small thing that had undone his bid for supremacy. And then, incredibly, he laughed. Well played, little mortal, well played indeed. The god withdrew, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. The game had changed. The rules were new. And Nefret, no longer slave, no longer just a messenger, collapsed into Amenemhat's arms as the old priest rushed forward to catch her. Did it work? She whispered. Look, he said, turning her to face the crowd. The guards were removing their weapons. Masters were embracing freed slaves. And above it all, the sky was no longer the sickly red of divine warfare, but the clean, honest blue of a new day. Mahat, it seemed, could be found even in revolution.